Last week, I finished reading Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and posted my review. And if you missed it, I'll leave a link in the description down below. But this week, I'm moving on to the sequel to Watchmen, Doomsday Clock, aka Watchmen meets the DC Universe. Parts 1 and 2. I was originally thinking I would review each part separately, but I got to the end of part 1 and there were just. It wasn't a complete or coherent story. There didn't seem to be any point in reviewing it separately, so I thought I'll just read both parts and then film the review. You can see here, these are library books, and they're in my school library actually because I requested them. So a quick background on that maybe. I've been working with my school library on a project to get more comic books or graphic novels in the library in order to encourage extensive reading for our Vietnamese students learning English. I'm teaching at a school out here in Vietnam. As part of that, we were looking at the library data to see which comic books were already being checked out the most frequently. And somewhat to my surprise, Watchmen, which I don't know if you can tell, this copy is a little bit old and battered. It had been in the library for some years before I got there. This wasn't one of the ones I requested. I wouldn't have necessarily felt that this would be popular, but this was one of the 10 most popular books that was getting checked out. Yeah, I don't know why. Possibly, because the movie has made this book more popular. Possibly the HBO TV series. Was it HBO or Showtime? The TV series that just came out. I don't know, but for whatever reason, this book was getting checked out a lot. So, when we were ordering new books, we were looking to build on what was already popular with the students. And I thought, okay, well, if Watchmen is popular, order something more related to Watchmen. And I vaguely remembered having read about on the internet, sites like IO9, etc., descriptions of the crossover between the Watchmen and the DC universe. Now, maybe I should give my own background here to comics because this is going to inform how I view this. I got into comic books intensely for about a couple years when I was in high school in the early 90s, in which I was reading the stuff that was coming out at the time, and I was also trying to, get back issues through the back issue bin in the comic book store. So the back issues went through the late 80s that I was able to have access to. And then grew out of it, as you do, although every once in a while I get the urge to get back into it. Certainly, yeah. It's a medium that does not necessarily improve with age. You don't necessarily appreciate these more at 40 than you do at 14, but it's still interesting. There's some nostalgia there. I can get wrapped up in the story. Anyways, to the mid-aughts, 2006, 2007, 2008, I came back for some of that just to see what was going on. So Infinite Crisis and some of the follow-ups to that, 52 and then Final Crisis. These are some of the big shakeups with the DC universe. But since 2008, I really have not kept tabs on what's happening with the DC universe other than what filters through popular entertainment sites like the AV Club or IO9. So I knew that there was some sort of crossover going on with the Watchmen, but I didn't know really any of the details or what the state of the DC universe was like, etc. But I thought, number one, the library loan rates for the original Watchmen seemed to justify ordering more Watchmen-related books. And second of all, if I can admit to a personal motive here, I also thought it might be interesting to see Watchmen meets the DC universe. So that's my background going into this, knowing very little about the state of the DC universe at the time uh, at this story takes place. And that I think that will become evident as I give my review. Certainly, as always, feel free to comment if you know more than I do, or if there are elements I'm missing here. I welcome that kind of interaction. But that's the perspective I'm going to be reviewing these at. And while I'm getting all of that out of the way, let me just say that I'm going to do this review assuming that you're already familiar with Watchmen. So I'm going to talk about the story in Watchmen as if it's common knowledge, the baseline knowledge for what's going on in these books. And I will be spoiling a bunch of stuff. Okay, so I guess the first thing to talk about is at the time that it became known that DC was not only doing this crossover between Watchmen and the DC universe, but DC was also licensing a bunch of Watchmen properties at this time. I think there was Before Watchmen, there was that HBO TV series, etc. It was something that was regarded as possibly in a little bit of bad taste because Alan Moore, the creator of Watchmen, believed that he had created a work of art, and I think a lot of people agreed with that. And he did not want this to just become part of the comic book franchise. He wanted Watchmen to just be left alone. He didn't want DC to. He didn't want the movie to be authorized. He didn't want the sequels to be authorized. He didn't want the prequels to be authorized. He certainly didn't want any crossover series with the DC universe to be authorized. So this is a work that's very much going against the original author's wishes. Now, how much that matters to you, I guess, is going to be a big factor in determining how receptive you are to reading this. I've decided that I think it largely does not matter to me. And I know there are people who are going to have differing viewpoints. Again, I'd be open to dialogue on this. But my personal viewpoint is that there should be no restrictions on the creative arts, or as little as possible. So if we say, well, the original creators wouldn't have wanted us to create this story, then we're limiting what we can create. And I think great art is going to be encouraged by opening up the restrictions and saying you can do whatever you want. Now, when you say that, 99% of the stuff that's going to be created is going to be crap just because of the law of averages. But still, by allowing more, there's still going to be that 1% of great art that's going to rise to the surface. Now, this is not it. This is not it. Let me be clear about that right from the beginning. But allowing this as part of a culture of encouraging more creativity with arts that might someday down the line produce something that's more beneficial, or more of a great art, if that makes sense. And I also just thought it would be kind of fun to see a crossover between the Watchmen and the DC universe. Now, it's going. My initial impression going into this was that it was definitely going to be something that was cheesy, because the very idea of it was so exploitative. That, to take these characters that the original creator didn't want messed with and to involve them in some cheap crossover was going to be, I mean, first of all, the whole thing had a crash commercialism aspect to it. As well as there's a big tonal difference between the tone of the characters in the universe of Watchmen and the tone of the characters in the DC universe. But that tonal clash can all be part of the fun as well. And, comic books will quite frequently play in to that weird tonal juxtaposition. The when they do crossovers, the most obvious example I can think of right now. I'm sure there are a million examples, but the Punisher meets Archie. Yeah, you remember that? There was a crossover between the Punisher and Archie. They couldn't be more different in tone, but then that whole bizarreness of it is part of the fun of the crossovers, right? As well as, I mean, the DC universe itself has always been a juxtaposition of tones. It's got all these characters that they've inherited from a time when comic books were very kind of silly, innocent children's entertainment. And they've kept these old characters from the 1940s and the 1960s, and they've kept them into a time period when comic books have gotten more violent and graphic and gritty and adult. And that whole... I always found that fascinating when I was first getting into comic books way back as a teenager, that weird tonal clash. So I'd be up for something like that. And, there are all sorts of interesting things that you can do with this. You could have Night Owl and Batman meet up and go on adventures. You could have Superman and Dr. Manhattan team up together. You could have Batman and Rorschach together. In fact, since DC Comics owns a lot of the characters now that were the inspiration for the Watchmen, you could play around with that, right? You could have Rorschach meet up with the Question, or maybe some of the other Steve Ditko characters that DC has in their under their copyright, like the Creeper or Hawk and Dove or something like that. You could have Night Owl meet up with the Blue Beetle. Lots of different interesting things you could do with this, which this series does not do. There are a ton of interesting things they could do, and they largely dropped the ball on this. And have some rather puzzling narrative choices instead, when it seemed like the obvious thing to do was right in front of them. And I'll get around to kind of criticizing those as we go. But I guess maybe the first thing to say about this is I've seen people on the internet say it's not really a Watchmen book. It's more of a DC resetting their universe type book. And maybe that is the best lens to view this through. So, let's talk about DC resetting their universe briefly. Both DC Comics and their competitor Marvel have had to adjust their continuity from time to time, largely because they don't want their characters to age. So they don't want Superman to be 120 years old. They want Superman to be perpetually 30. They want Batman to be perpetually 30, or however old these characters are supposed to be. But these characters date back to the 1940s or the 1960s. Now, in the early days of comics, nobody really cared about continuity, so it wasn't a problem. But as geek culture has developed, fans care about the issues all being part of one coherent storyline that all makes sense. So it's necessary for DC to periodically come up with reasons why the Superman in the 1940s is not the same Superman that's appearing in 2019, which I think was when the series came out, around 2019. They've done this several times since 1986. 1986, well, actually, if you count the 1960s, the first. Actually, do we need to get into this? Let's do the simple version. Since 1986, they had Crisis on Infinite Earths, which reset the timeline. But of course, 1986 was like 40 years ago now, right? So you have to keep resetting the timeline. So they have, I think their tradition is about once every 10 years. They have some sort of big event which resets the timeline. So Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s, Zero Hour in the 90s, Infinite Crisis in the aughts, followed by 52, followed by Final Crisis, which is after Final Crisis is where I stopped paying attention, but they keep doing all this stuff, the New 52, DC Rebirth, stuff like that. These are all things I've not read. So part of the reason that, in addition to just maintaining their continuity, that I think they like to do this is because they launch it as a big event where, you know, the universe doesn't just reset itself. There's always some sort of big battle over the timeline. Somebody's messing with the timeline. You've got to have a big fight. And because it involves the whole DC universe, you bring out all the characters. Everybody shows up. All the characters from the Golden Age to the present age. And I think what's been true of all of these big events is that they don't really make a lot of sense, at least for my money. And this goes all the way back to the original 1986 Crisis on Infinite Earths. I've read through that graphic novel. I even read the novelization of that graphic novel by Marv Wolfman, which I've talked about on this channel. One of the reasons I read the novelization is because I was hoping the novel might make more sense than the graphic novel. I read the Final Crisis and Infinite Crisis, and all of these big events just have so much going on and so little explained that I feel like there are pages missing from them. I think I felt that for all of these big events. And that is certainly true here. There is a lot of stuff that just doesn't make sense and is not explained. Now, some of this, I think, is explained in other issues. So there is a lot of stuff leading up to this. I was actually Googling some of this before doing this review. And somebody said, to understand Doomsday Clock, there's a whole bunch of individual issues and collected events you need to read first. I forget what they all were. Something like DC Rebirth and the New 52 and all this stuff. And all these individual issues, Batman and Superman issues. So this is part of a larger story, which elements of it may not make sense because we don't have access to the full story here. And that can be frustrating. Although, as I've talked before on this channel, I accept that as part of reading comic books, or at least part of reading DC or Marvel comic books. So whenever you pick up anything in the mainstream continuity by DC or Marvel, you have to accept that there is this whole larger continuity, this whole larger story, which you don't have access to because you don't have enough money to buy all the issues that you would possibly need to read to access everything. You are only accessing part of the story, and you just have to accept that the larger story is out there somewhere, and you just get bits and pieces of it. And I always thought that was kind of part of the appeal or part of the fun when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I should say. And I guess I still hold to that view. So I don't hold that against this comic. Although I suspect that there's a lot of stuff here that still doesn't make any sense, even if I had access to the larger story. I'm going to talk about some of that here. And again, if anyone has extra information, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. So this is doing 3 things at once, maybe 4 things. 1, this is a sequel to the original Watchmen, and it picks up in the Watchmen universe, kind of where are they now, telling what's happened with the plan, the plan that Adrian Veidt had set in motion at the end of the original Watchmen, how the world has evolved, etc. Sorry, let me keep these bullet points brief. 1, it's a sequel to the original Watchmen. 2, it's a crossover between the Watchmen and the DC Universe. 3, it's a reset event for the DC Universe where there's some big battle about the timeline like they always do every 10 years. And 4, this is a accumulation of a number of different storylines that have been going on in the DC Universe prior to this, which as I mentioned before, I haven't really been following. Also, for my money, this part 1 and part 2 stuff is just an attempt to get more money out of the buying public. It should just be one collection. And to be fair, there are editions of this that are just one collection. I forget why I ordered the part 1 and part 2 versions. I think maybe the one collection version was even more expensive because it had extra stuff in it, or maybe it wasn't in stock on Amazon. I don't remember, but it's 12 issues in total. Now, the original Watchmen was also 12 issues in total, and they managed to put that into all one binding. So, yeah, it shouldn't be, and these are both hardcover. That's needless extra packaging, trying to get you to spend more money so you can get the complete story. It should just be one volume. Okay, so let's dig into this now and analyze a little bit what is going on here. Right, where to start with this? Okay. So, as a sequel to Watchmen, well, it starts off, yeah, the whole first part is kind of replaying Watchmen's greatest hits. So there's another nuclear crisis. It's the year 1992 this time. In the Watchmen universe. Russia is moving into Poland. So we start off with another nuclear crisis, just like the original Watchmen. Rorschach is back. He died in the original Watchmen, of course, as you'll remember, but he is back now for reasons that will be explained later. The dialogue is very reminiscent of the original Watchmen. It's told through Rorschach's journal. There are lines that are meant to evoke the original Watchmen. We shattered the American dream. This is the American nightmare. In the original Watchmen, there was a quotable line about how the American dream came true and you're living it. That's a direct callback to that. Just like in the original Watchmen, there is a story within a story that is occurring here about some detective novel. Just like in the original Watchmen, there are pages of text bookending each issue. Just like in the original Watchmen, Rorschach gets captured and is, let me see if I can find those pages, put in prison, and look, here is Rorschach. This is Rorschach. Trust me on that for now. This is Rorschach in the lunch line at the prison and evoking another line. And then the Rorschach is asked to evaluate the ink blots by a psychologist who is trying to analyze him, just like. And then we have an extended flashback here to find out how the origin story of Rorschach and the other characters. So it's not so much telling new stories as it is just kind of doing like a Watchmen retread, going over the Watchmen's greatest hits. And I thought, oh, no, this is not what I wanted to read. I just got done reading Watchmen. I just got done with this story. I don't want you to retread this story again. I mean, if I wanted to read this again, I could just go back to the original Watchmen. Which is, I know this is a common criticism of a lot of the nostalgic entertainment that's come out these days, right? The new Indiana Jones movies, the new Star Wars movies, they just kind of, rather than telling new stories with these characters, they just try and replay the originals. Yeah, this definitely suffers from that symptom. Now, I guess maybe to try and be fair about this is, like I said before, only partially a sequel to Watchmen. It's also a accumulation or a continuation of a lot of storylines that were going on in the DC universe at the time. So I guess when in my case, I just got done reading the original Watchmen and then picked this up directly after. But that's not true of everybody who reads this. Maybe some people are picking this up off the newsstands. They haven't gone back to Watchmen for 10 or 20 years. You know, who knows, maybe. And then they're reading this and they're feeling a little bit, being reminded of the Watchmen series that they hadn't read in a long time and feeling like those callbacks are working for them. I don't know, you know, maybe. So, yeah. When we get into the second issue, certainly the second issue is largely focused on the battle for the timeline and the DC universe characters. So the idea of retreading Watchmen is not as evident in the part 2. Sorry, did I say second issue? I'm in the second volume here. Although they still have elements of it. There's still references to the story within the story. And the pages of text at the end. Although, yeah. The writers seem to be a lot less invested. It's like, geez, okay, we've got to put some sort of text at the end just to maintain this theme. Just like Watchmen had a couple pages of text at the end of each issue, we've got to throw something in here so that like the stuff that they throw in is less and less impressive. Really, they didn't need to imitate the original style of Watchmen. It would have been fine to pick up the characters. Okay. So we pick up the characters. Now, let's talk about the characters. Night Owl and Silk Spectre are out of this story. They make a brief cameo at the end, but that cameo is nothing. It's mentioned that Veidt couldn't get them out of retirement, so it's. Yeah, it's another missed opportunity. I mean, if we're going to do a crossover with Watchmen in the DC universe, let's do this. You know, let's have Night Owl meeting Blue Beetle, or Night Owl comparing tech with Batman or something like that. I don't know why they don't do that. So from the original characters, we've got Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, who's a major player. And then we've got the new Rorschach. So Rorschach died at the end of the original Watchmen, but they've got somebody else now who has taken his mantle. and is dressing up as Rorschach and pretending to be Rorschach. Now, on the one hand, it is very established in superhero comics that characters will take on each other's mantle. It's something that was even referenced in the original Watchmen. Night Owl and Silk Spectre are both legacy characters even within the Watchmen universe. There was an original Night Owl in the 1940s and then the Night Owl 2 in the 1960s. Same with the Silk Spectre. So, okay, this is an established thing in comics. On the other hand, Rorschach was such an individual character. I mean, you can put whoever you want in the mask, but there's really only one Rorschach. It wasn't the mask, it was this delusional, self-righteous, morally uncompromising character. So if there's somebody else in the mask, what's the point? And they try and recreate this as somebody with some similar personality aspects to Rorschach, and they give him this backstory about how he did that, and it maybe kind of works. I was feeling very resistant to this all the way up until part 2, when the character realized that it was stupid of him to try and imitate Rorschach. And because that's where that character arc was ultimately going, he abandoned being the new Rorschach, and he realized that it was a stupid thing to imitate. Well, before he got convinced to put on the mask, but at this point he's his own person now. He's not trying to imitate Rorschach. Because that character arc came all the way around at the end, I think I largely forgave it. But again, going back to the crash commercialism of this, the reason that they are putting Rorschach back in the story is just because Rorschach is one of the most marketable characters. So you want to be able to put Rorschach on the covers of these as they were on the newsstand, as well as the cover here. Okay. Then we have the Mime and the Marionette, who are from the Watchmen universe. Now, they were not part of the original Watchmen, but in the first couple issues of this, before the Watchmen cross over into the DC universe, the Watchmen are still in their own universe. And the Mime and the Marionette are characters that are established as being part of this universe. In my opinion, they do not fit into the Watchmen universe at all. They're perfectly fine in the DC universe. But in the Watchmen universe, when Alan Moore is trying to deconstruct the superheroes and supervillains and make them realistic, or as much as can be, these are just two psychotic characters who are just psychotic for the sake of being psychotic. I mean, they do give them an origin story at the end of part 1, in which they try to explain how their psychoticness is a result of their awful childhood and all the awful things that happened to them. But it's the same. It doesn't make sense, first of all. And it's the same origin story that happens with all the supervillains, and I don't think it would explain their level of complete psychoticness. They are psychotic clowns who go around killing people and cutting people up, much in the mold of the Joker. They also have magical powers which are never explained, which you can get away with in the DC universe, but it would not make sense in the Watchmen universe. So the Mime has, let me see if it's anywhere in here. The Mime has the ability to, he's got some sort of invisible weapons, which he's or either that or he's able to manifest these weapons by making gestures. So it looks like he's miming shooting somebody, but then an actual bullet comes out. Looks like he's miming throwing a knife, but then an actual knife comes out. And it's never explained how he got these magical invisible weapons. I even went to Google, look these guys up on the DC Universe Wiki, and all it says is somehow or another he got invisible weapons somewhere along the line. Now, again, if this was in the DC universe, there are all sorts of magical characters, but in the Watchmen universe, it's supposed to be a lot more realistic. So, these psychotic clown characters who are, through a plot that doesn't make sense at all, brought into the DC universe by Adrian Veidt. And shortly thereafter escape and go on a rampage and then end up meeting up with the Joker sooner or later. And the comic, let me see if I can find the panels. The comic kind of builds up the meeting. Like, oh, here we go. It's the mime and the marionette. Two psychotic clowns from the Watchmen universe, and they're meeting up with the Joker, the psychotic clown from the DC universe. And I think the comic is expecting you to be impressed by this great crossover. But I'm like, well, but these two characters aren't really Watchmen characters. They're characters that you created just like 2 seconds ago, a few pages ago. And you've placed them in the Watchmen universe, but they're not from the 1986 Watchmen. They're from this comic. So I don't really care anything about them or why they're crossing over with the Joker. And the mime and the marionette are a huge part of this story. They get way too many panels describing their backstory and their relationship and their adventures, and they're not interesting characters at all. They're second-rate villains. So, yeah. We don't get the Night Owl. We don't get the Silk Spectre. We get a Rorschach who's not really Rorschach. And then we've got two characters from the Watchmen universe who don't really belong in the Watchmen universe, who weren't really part of the original Watchmen, who weren't part of the original Watchmen at all, who are part of this crossover. It's like, what kind of crossover are we doing? But they do bring back the comedian, who shows up in a dramatic moment shooting at Adrian Veidt. And he says, last time you came at me, I was confused, drunk, impossible. This time, I'm ready for you. So the comedian is back, and he's got that rematch with Adrian Veidt. Now, how is the comedian still alive? Okay, so to be fair, this is explained, kind of. We get a flashback in the next issue. Adrian Veidt, this is the iconic scene from Watchmen where the comedian's getting thrown out of the window. And then as he's falling, he gets magically transported into the ocean where Dr. Manhattan has transported him into the DC universe. Okay, so fair enough. Dr. Manhattan has the power to transform people. This explains why the comedian is still alive, except it doesn't explain anything at all because, okay, number one, why did Dr. Manhattan transport him into the DC universe? Never explained. So, because I might be missing something, I went to Wikipedia and the DC Wiki, and I looked this up, the comedian, blah, 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 and on the DC, on all the sources I checked, it just says that the comedian was transported by Dr. Manhattan into the DC universe. It doesn't say why. So why is the comedian in the DC universe? Why did Dr. Manhattan transport him over? Never explained. Secondly, I mean, within the Watchmen universe, what's happening here? Is Dr. Manhattan going back in time to rescue the comedian, or does he rescue him in real time? Does Dr. Manhattan have the ability to go back in time? It's not clear in the original Watchmen that he does, or am I missing something? I mean, in the original Watchmen, he knows what's going to happen, but he can't move back and forth through time himself, can he? Then, in the original Watchmen, if his body never hits the ground, then what happens in the original Watchmen universe? Or does Dr. Manhattan create another fake body of the comedian that hits the ground? And if so, does Dr. Manhattan have the ability to do that? I mean, Dr. Manhattan, if his own body is going anything to go by, hasn't gotten around to accurately recreating all the finer details of what a human face looks like, or the texture of human skin. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And this is going to be typical of the way the story is going to progress from here on out. Is stuff will happen, but it doesn't make sense and it's not explained. And I am not going to try and bother talking about everything that happens in this series that just doesn't make sense and is not explained, because we'd be here all day. And furthermore, it's shooting fish in a barrel. It's the low-hanging fruit of criticism, to just go through and point out all the obvious stuff that doesn't make sense, that's already obvious. Other than to say that the comedian's arc gets resolved at the end with Lex Luthor sending him back to his original timeline to fall to his death after all. So, and then, the comedian's role in this doesn't make any sense. He shows up later again at a collection of the villains, and he shoots some of them, and he becomes like an antagonist for the mime and the marionette, where he's trying to hunt them down until they capture him. And then, I mean, why is he doing any of this? Why is any of this happening? It doesn't make any sense. Why is he killing the Batman villains? Why is the comedian killing the Batman villains? Why is he tracking down the mime and the marionette? Why is he doing any of the things he's doing? It doesn't make any sense. But he gets captured, and then he just spends the rest of the time being captured or tortured a little bit by the mime and the marionette. And then, Lex Luthor sends him back to his original timeline, where he just occupies the spot he was at previously and falls to his death. So, somebody really wanted to bring back the comedian very badly for this, but then didn't bother to utilize him in any really good way, and then it just sent him back afterwards. One of the missed opportunities here, it strikes me, if you want to bring one of the characters from Watchmen back from the dead, and you want to have Dr. Manhattan do it, Rorschach is the obvious choice. Because right at the end of the original Watchmen, you remember Dr. Manhattan vaporizes Rorschach. You could easily rewrite that and say, actually, Dr. Manhattan didn't vaporize Rorschach. He sent Rorschach to another universe. Boom. You have Rorschach in the DC universe showing up. You don't have to have somebody else inheriting the mantle of Rorschach. If you want to do all those iconic scenes of Rorschach meeting Batman, which this series so desperately wants to do, then there you go. It's for you on a golden platter. But to have the comedian go back and move Rorschach and sorry, I'm messing up my words. To have Dr. Manhattan go back in time and transport the comedian to the DC universe and save the comedian from death, what sense does that make? Okay, so the comedian fights against Adrian Veidt. Adrian Veidt gets beat by the comedian. Adrian Veidt gets beat a lot in this collection, in this story, which I don't think is in keeping with his original characterization from the original Watchmen. I think the original Watchmen, he does say the comedian beat him the first time they met up, back in the 1960s or whatever. But since then, Veidt has honed his skills so much that the comedian is no longer a match for him. Certainly, when Veidt killed the comedian in the original Watchmen, the comedian wasn't able to put up much of a fight. They do try and explain that away by saying, last time I was confused and drunk, this time I'm ready for you, but I don't buy it. Also, yeah, Veidt gets a couple other... His characterization in this is not consistent, I think, with his characterization with the original Watchmen. But granted, this kind of stuff can be a little bit subjective. I also feel like Dr. Manhattan has more increased powers in this. In the ability to move back and forth in time, I don't think he had that in the original Watchmen. I think he's got more of an omnipotence now. I think in the original Watchmen, he was able to know the stuff that was happening around him, but I'm not sure he was able to sense stuff that was happening all around the Earth. Although, to be fair, even in the original Watchmen, I think his ability to know the future and yet not know the future didn't entirely make sense. And I know they tried to explain that away with the tachyons traveling backwards through the time stream. But that only holds true for like the climactic event in Watchmen. That doesn't explain all the other events in Dr. Manhattan's life where he doesn't seem to have foreknowledge of the stuff that's going to happen to him. So I think it's inconsistent even in the original Watchmen. Even more inconsistent here. And they try and talk about how tachyon particles are muddling things up here in the sequel. So Dr. Manhattan knows he's going to have some sort of confrontation with Superman, but he doesn't know why he's going to have that confrontation or what the results of that are going to be. Something again about tachyon particles disturbing his ability to predict the future. I'm not sure what those tachyon particles are doing in this sequel. In the original Watchmen, I think it was explained that Adrian Veidt had set up those tachyon particles. I mean, I'm starting to list all the things that don't make sense, which I said I wasn't going to do because there's just so much of it. There's an attempt to set up a story within a story here, just like in the original Watchmen. It does not, in my opinion, work, doesn't fit thematically. There's a mystery that gets set up about who, just like in the original Watchmen, murder mystery from the past that gets set up and then later resolved in a very uninteresting way. Sorry, I'm just trying to list things off quickly here because I don't want to get stuck into going through every single thing in the novel. Sorry, in the comic. There's just Batman does a lot of things that don't really make sense in his encounters with Rorschach. He has the Rorschach committed to an insane asylum, where when Rorschach comes to him for help, which seems like a really dick move on Batman's part, there's a psychologist who comes to talk to Rorschach. Again, this is paralleling the original Watchmen book, but it turns out later, let me see if I can find that panel. Turns out later that psychologist was actually Batman in a psychologist mask, which is, oh, come on, ridiculous. Okay, but I guess at least that's something that's explained. The mime and the marionette have a backstory which doesn't make any sense about how corrupt criminals are and cops are terrorizing her father. But this doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like all the corrupt cops want her father to do is to point out which marionette puppet has the money hidden in it that the gangsters have dropped off. And every time her father is really reluctant to do that, I don't know why he just doesn't tell them what the puppet is and save himself the beating. If that's all they want him to do. And then hangs himself. Doesn't make any sense why he would do this if none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. None of anything that's going on here makes sense. You just have to think, okay, this is what happened next. This is what happened next. Black Adam is setting up a retreat in, what's the name of it? Kandar. The Creeper is set up early as one of the prominent teammates of Black Adam in Kandar. The Creeper is another one of Steve Ditko's characters. So Rorschach is based on one of Steve Ditko's characters. So I thought maybe they were going to build this up with the Steve Ditko connection. But then after featuring prominently in a couple of panels, the Creeper largely disappears. There's something, of course, about the whole multiverse changing all the time, which doesn't make any sense. But to be fair, it's never really made a lot of sense in any of DC's big universe-changing events. There's, in the last few panels, we get some nostalgia for the golden age of DC's superheroes, where the 1940s Justice Society of America. Let me see if I can find the panels. And a reckoning nods back to DC's golden age. I felt though, like as I read those panels, that I've seen this so many times before. I mean, I feel like DC has been doing tributes back to their golden age heroes for 40 years now, with every big Earth multiple universe crossover event that they do. There's always bringing out the golden age heroes. So I thought, I like that DC remembers its history and does all these nods back to the original Justice Society of America from the 1940s. But I feel like I've seen this so many times. Yeah. So a lot of stuff happening which doesn't make any sense at all. But oh yeah. And then look at this. There's some sort of final universe resetting event, which they convey to us by it going completely black, and then still black, and then 9 more panels of black, and then, okay, we're restarting the universe now. Now, could this same idea have been conveyed with maybe 1 panel of black instead of like 3 pages of it going black? I mean, if I had bought this issue off of the newsstand, I would have felt a little bit ripped off for this. Especially when you think about all these things in here that don't make any sense at all or are never explained. You know, this is valuable real estate where you could have been doing a little bit of explaining here. Yeah. There is a lot more things that don't make any sense in here that I could talk about for a lot longer. But I said I wasn't going to do that, and I think I'm going to try and wrap things up. I've been talking for almost an hour now. So to sum up, doesn't make any sense. Still largely entertaining. I mean, kept me turning the pages more or less. I was bored at the beginning when it was doing a Watchmen retread, and we were seeing the threat of nuclear war again. Rorschach talking with a psychiatrist again. The long backstory of the new Rorschach and the long backstory of the mime and the marionette, which were not very good backstories to begin with, and went on for far too long. But then in the second part, when we get into the second part, we get a whole lot of action set pieces. And again, characters are doing a whole bunch of things which just do not make any sense at all. But at least things are moving, and it does keep you turning the pages. Certainly, in my case, I was turning the pages out of a lot of curiosity. Like, okay, what are they going to do next? What ridiculous thing are they going to do next? Yeah. They don't... Yeah. It's a crossover between Watchmen and the DC Universe in which they completely do not make any use of all the interesting things they could have done with a crossover between Watchmen and the DC Universe. But they, to give some sort of credit at the very end, they do kind of set up the possibility of more crossovers happening. Now, I've checked this with Google and Wikipedia and the DC Wiki, and I don't think that this is the Night Owl and the Silk Spectre here. You remember at the end of the original Watchmen, they changed their hair color. Raising a couple kids, one of which is a foster kid from Dr. Manhattan. And they set up that these kids are going to do big things, which I didn't find any evidence of this on Wikipedia, that these characters have had further interaction with the DC Universe, but the door is now open to do some interesting crossovers in the future. Because this one is largely a missed opportunity, although there's enough going on here that I guess it's at least an interesting missed opportunity. One more thing I'm going to complain about is the print is too small on some of these text pages. I really had to squint to see it. Now, this is partly age. I was in to see the eye doctor earlier this year, and he warned me I'd be needing reading glasses in the near future. But does the print have to be this small? It looks big now because I'm focused in on it. But it's here's a normal size print. Here's the print here. Yeah, DC Comics. I know I'm going to need reading glasses someday soon, but you don't need to. You don't need to make me feel my age that much by having the print that small. Ugh. Okay, so yeah, a complete mess, largely entertaining. You know, when you heard that the Watchmen were crossing over with the DC universe, you knew it wasn't going to be well done, right? You knew it was just going to be some ridiculous thing, anyways, right? So I guess that's what you get. Yeah, mostly entertaining.